recording, which I've now done. So if I haven't said so since you joined, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the call. Let me just momentarily share my slides. Okay, which I've done. Hopefully you can all see that. Just a reminder of the agenda for the call today. The main focus of the call will be, I'll hand over to David in a moment from ADAMnetworks to remind us why we shouldn't talk to strangers. An alternative version to Zero Trust DNS from Microsoft, or complementary version, I don't know, David can position that in a moment. And then as always, I'll just touch on some sort of developments over the last week or so, remind you of some forthcoming events, and what's next on our agenda in terms of core topics, and wrapping up as always at the top of the hour, 5 p.m. UK time, or whatever time it is in your time zone. Okay, so that's the plan. At this point then, I'll just say welcome, David. Thank you for joining. This is a response, I can't off the top of my head remind me, but anyway, one of our other sort of call participants suggested it will be a good thing to have David join us to sort of talk about the Don't Talk to Strangers capability from ADAMnetworks, and this was in the context of Tommy Jensen's I was going to say ZTDNS or ZTDNS, if you're from the wrong side of the Atlantic, which he presented a couple of months back now, I think it was. I had a look at the ADAMnetworks sort of website. It looked like a really interesting approach, and David has kindly agreed to join us. So without further ado, David, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, Andrew, and I see Tommy has joined us as well. Now, Tommy knows John well at Quad 9, and if you don't know about Quad 9, I strongly recommend everybody investigate them. They do good work. I mean, really, over the years, we have regularly looked at incidental when we have an incident and quickly check, well, who was the first to detect it? And it's clear that Quad 9 continues to grow in their ability to be a protective DNS server. Anyway, it was from John at Quad 9. He said, hey, David, you should connect with Andrew because he just chatted with Tommy. And so that's why I'm here today. So thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Great. And well, it's good of you to join. So do you want to sort of take us through the sort of Don't Talk to Strangers capability in the context of the ADAMnetworks offering? What I'd suggest is
yes,
run through that, and then we'll take questions at the back end, unless anyone has a clarification point as you go through.
Sounds good. First of all, thank you, Tommy, for allowing me to say Zed, because even on this side of the Atlantic, Andrew, there are a small percentage of people that say Z over Z. But last week, every time I did a presentation at Black Hat, it was always Z. I don't think I tripped up once. So I am trilingual, as my wife tells people. I try anything. So as long as it's got the alphabet that we've inherited from Latin or Germanic languages, then I'm good to try it. So don't talk to strangers maybe begs a little bit of a clarification what that means, because it's not exactly in the context of the linguistic feature that we've had in English of don't talk to strangers in real life, but we felt like it was an appropriate way to describe that any IP address that your application, your operating system is trying to reach out to, if it was not discovered by a DNS query, by our definition, it's a stranger. The moment your protective resolver gives you an IP address that you are allowed to go to, then it's no longer a stranger, but that stranger status is very short-lived, and it's equal to the time to live. And so about 6 years ago is the first time we're in a production environment. We turned on the Don't Talk to Strangers feature for some business clients, and we, of course, encountered the exact same issues that Tommy found at Microsoft, where you have applications that we call misbehaving, and maybe it's not quite Canadian enough. Maybe we're not quite nice enough, because it's not like authors purposefully wanted those apps to misbehave, because many of them had legitimate reasons to not use DNS as a discovery method. And the most common ones have already related online by us and Microsoft that are your video protocols, including this Zoom call, will actually end up using a UDP through Anycast networks that are not discovered through DNS. And so the crux of the issue ends up being that this probably would have been done sooner if it didn't have the hurdles of the stuff that's broken as a result of using Don't Talk to Strangers. But I think we're at a point, though, in cybersecurity where if you go through the thought exercise of every one of the threats that comes across our landscape, and when their security researchers report in detail, step-by-step, how an attack occurred, go through the thought exercise. This would be my challenge to anybody who's interested in being proactively secure, is to go through and say, well, at what point would Don't Talk to Strangers or ZTDNS actually have prevented that particular attack chain? And I think you'd be pleasantly surprised that there are very few attacks that don't get disrupted with this process. And so instead of it being at the endpoint, which is a great place to be if you have full control and you can manage it and all those things, which of course is representative of probably the most valuable assets that are on the planet today. They probably are managed and are probably under MDM. But we also have a tremendous amount of devices on networks that are not protectable because the vendor is no longer offering firmware upgrades, or you have something where the firmware upgrade is available, but it can't be applied because it breaks some kind of other legacy implementation or integration or whatever. Any of you who have been in the MSP or MSSP business, you know that this is not a simple, clean solution, right? Very few of our clients are greenfield. Most of them have to have legacy stuff, especially in government. You not only have to support the newest, latest, and greatest, but you also got to go back 10, 15, 20 years and support the old stuff. So we felt like this needed to be at the gateway. And then for the Don't Talk to Strangers engine to have layer 2 visibility to every endpoint. What that means is the software that we have today that's matured and can scale to 10,000 firewall rule changes per second at the gateway, all done in user space, by the way, in the Linux world with NF tables, that you end up with a solution that actually allows every kind of a device, OT, IoT, and everything else to work. The only issue with doing it at the gateway is that you have multi-home devices that are now leaving work and then joining a Starbucks Wi-Fi, joining a home Wi-Fi. How do you protect them? So aside from ZTDNS, we also offer a solution that makes use of always-on VPN connections. And this is in a day, I'm very aware, where everything's about don't do things over VPN anymore. But if we look at this objectively, the VPN approach actually is something that has tremendous value. I, for example, on my iOS device, the entire time I'm in Vegas, every app, everything I try to do thinks I'm in Montreal, because my, what we call AdamGo, my AdamGo exit is in a Google Cloud data center out of Montreal. And so I end up getting additional IP privacy, but I also get the Don't Talk to Strangers. I also get the protective DNS service with my device as I'm traveling. And I can freely join a Wi-Fi hotspot, even if it is an evil twin. right? Because the only way always-on VPN connections work is if the tunnel connection itself can be made, and that all other traffic must go over that tunnel. And kudos to Microsoft, because the always-on VPN technology has been around for a long time. It used to be called something else. Maybe Tommy can tell me what it used to be called. But today, it is available in multiple flavors. Since Windows 11, not only is it an IPsec tunnel that's a user VPN instead of a device VPN, but you can also, with MDM, lock it out so that a user cannot disconnect it. Direct access, thank you. That's what I was thinking about, Tommy. So what used to be called direct access today is just always on a VPN. And that's a very mature technology, and we have clients that are using this that are, for example, hosting highly valuable content, that are worried about getting malware on systems that then exfiltrate intellectual property, for example. So this is a way for them to receive that protection even when they're at home, not being worried about what kind of a router or security policy or posture they may have on their home Wi-Fi network. So when you combine everything that's static at an office network to be protective with Don't Talk to Strangers, with a protective DNS resolver that's powering it, and then always on VPN for the roaming devices, you end up with a reasonable solution that works through all devices. Now, just before ZTDNS, we had also started down the same path of doing endpoint native protection, and we call that ADAM OSN, for operating system native. And I'm excited to tell you that we have this solution fully functioning on the iOS platform. It does require multiple pieces of a puzzle, multiple MDM payloads that need to be pushed. And then we use DOQ at the endpoint that then reaches the designated DNS resolver that's also protective, and then a separate piece that does the Don't Talk to Strangers piece natively on iOS. And it's not available to the public just yet, but it is on our internal devices while we're just working out the final bits and pieces and how it gets rolled out. So between ADAM 1, which lives on a gateway, ADAM Go, which is an always-on VPN solution, and ADAM OSN, for those that don't want a VPN but natively protected, that's how you end up in that direction. So why do we do DOQ? Well, if you ever look at the overall, that's a good question, Kurt. When you switch from legacy DNS to DOT, it was HTTPS only, but port 853 was easily blockable, right? And so that's why it really, one of the main reasons why it did not get adopted. DOH then ended up getting adopted by the industry very quickly, because no firewall sysadmin will block TCP port 443. But if you ever took a look at the overall number of packets between legacy DNS and DOH, like there are some people who wrote incredible papers on, you know, the 20x increase in bandwidth, that it just wasn't scalable with today's infrastructure. It was crazy. Well, DOQ just added the UDP back in. So it's like we've come full circle, but now DNS over UDP is properly protected end to end. And so that's why we did a DOQ, because we could. And when you keep a UDP stream open, it is a lot less resource intensive on gateways. And, you know, this goes back to the days, I don't know if any of you guys ever were sysadmins in the days when, was it Bram Cohen first launched the peer-to-peer network software, and it was TCP based. And it was overwhelming ISP backbone networks. But the moment they introduced it over UDP, that, you know, congestion was completely gone. So it's a fundamental property where you have a stateful versus non-stateful protocol. And so for all of those reasons, DOQ was chosen. Yes, because of Google. I'm not sure I follow that, Peter, but Google definitely, between Google and Cloudflare and Mozilla Firefox, they moved the securing of the DNS channel faster than anything has ever gone through an RFC process before. So it was super impressive to see that happening. From our point of view, though, that entire process was riddled with problems. where a lot of organizations, like even if you take a look at the response from Dr. Paul Vixie, right, when he first started to see what was happening, it was very concerning because many of us were using legacy DNS already as a control plane, right? And so this removed that because you can't have the endpoint not be able to reach HTTPS TCP 443 on the internet. It has to be open. And so it was a little problematic. We have resolved that. So if you take the combination of Zero Trust DNS, Don't Talk to Strangers, the issue of DOH representing a circumvention around network-based policies, that's now a moot point. That's now solved. And so we end up having a solution where you not only still have the control plane available to you, but you also have the ability to block DOH to known destinations and unknown destinations. And here's the other thing that's pretty interesting. Let's say that a ZTDNS solution on a Windows endpoint or an endpoint that's behind a Don't Talk to Strangers somehow does have a hole opened to say 1.1.1.1 because maybe some other DNS query resolved to that. Now that destination hole is open for the period of time to live. The same argument can be made for, you know, Cloudflare, who behind its proxies supports, you know, tons of malicious websites. So the moment you can open up a destination that's resolvable, then both Microsoft and our strategy in this approach is to say that was resolvable. So therefore, allow any TCP, any UDP, any ICIP through that stream for the period of the time to live. So then the concern for those that are deeply investigating this, okay, now you've got a hole open to 1.1.1.1. Now I can do a DOH query. Technically, you can now make that DOH query. However, the resolving address that it now gets, that it now discovers, if it didn't do it through the proper channel, that hole is now not open. So even if you do have that hole open where you can grab new IP discoveries, those destinations are not reachable unless they're going through the properly, you know, sanctified channel, as it were, right? So in the end, if we were to now look at what the impact is of something like Don't Talk to Strangers and ZTDNS, is you end up, as I mentioned earlier, disrupting nearly every attack chain. And we see very few attack chains today that aren't multiple steps. So what we're starting to see in terms of attack mitigation in the real world today is we're starting to see that the fact that attacks today require multiple steps are now becoming the protector, the blue team's advantage, because you just need to disrupt that path in any one of the attack steps, right? You don't need to disrupt every step. Choose one step. Well, command and control at some point needs to reach out. And so if you look at all of the known C2 servers, very rarely do those C2 servers get resolved by DNS, because protective DNS resolvers, by the way of info blocks, commercially, Umbrella, and then the amazing Quad 9 people, and even Clean Browsing and others really are impressive. And so the amount of breadcrumbs that the attacker leaves behind, if they're using a domain name resolution to reach a command and control server, means that they're going to get caught very quickly. And for this reason, attackers almost always just use fixed IP addresses that are hosted at questionable service providers, or maybe it's a hijacked host somewhere on DigitalOcean. If you were to look at a cloud provider, it's amazing how highly concentrated attackers are within DigitalOcean, because they can, you know, light up a brand new public IP address for $5 and then just shut it down once they are discovered and on someone's threat until blacklist, right? And so if you just prevent that connection to begin with, because they don't use DNS, then you actually are saving yourself tremendously from potential attacks by just disrupting that particular step. And if we were to bring it back to the real world, this is actually how Pegasus forced entry worked. Remember when all of those iPhones were hijacked by that belonged to political opposition in many countries? That was done through a flaw inside the iMessage message processing service that was then able to install malware onto iOS that had persistence even post reboot, and then it would basically only ever use direct IP connections for its C2. So if you just do the thought exercise on that Pegasus force entry attack chain, you'd see exactly where that attack gets interrupted in the process. So anyway, that's kind of a very brief introduction. Maybe I should, since you did give me permission to share screen, kind of show you briefly what it actually looks like when, if you were to look at it from a point of view of logic. And I'm sure this is something that is probably easy to follow for anybody. So when you follow what Don't Talk to Strangers does, basically you have an endpoint that makes an outgoing connection, right? That's step one here. And then it asks, the first step is, was this previously established traffic? This is easily discernible with NF tables, IP tables, PF, and so forth in the various operating systems. And if it is established, then it's not a stranger. So we do not disrupt the existing flows. So for example, if there's a TCP session, say there's a WebSocket connection, but that DNS the TTL expired, if that is still an established connection, then that does not get severed. And so then it's allowed to make it out. But if it was not a previously established connection, then it says, was the previous time to live still valid? And if it is, then it's not a stranger, it makes an outgoing connection. But if it's not previously established traffic and the DNS TTL is not valid, meaning it's an IP or DNS-less IP connection, then we just give it a TCP reset or block the UDP connection. And the advantage of doing this is that now if an endpoint is making an attempt to make an outgoing connection and it fails, the failure is instantaneous. The endpoint gets the TCP reset and it's happy to move on, right? It's not sitting there trying, doing the 1 second, 2 second, 4 second, 8 seconds before it finally backs off. It is actually instantaneous. And that same approach actually works quite well for blocking third-party ad networks. So if for example, one of your devices is, or one of your DNS Harmony participants is, say, AdGuard Plus or Control D, or one of the ones that publicly block known third-party ad networks, it's the same thing. It tries to go to somebadadvertiser.com, then it's an instant reset. And so the browser doesn't even try. So you actually end up, what's really interesting is when we've finished and matured this, we realize that now the browsing experience is even faster than without it. When traditionally we're used to that our browsing experience gets slowed down the moment there is a customs officer anywhere in between you and the destination, right? So that's quite interesting. Maybe I should just pause for a second, see if I'm on the right track here, Andrew, with what you were hoping.
Yeah, surely. Well, let's just pause. There's been a bit of comment in the chat, but I don't think there are any open questions. So does anyone, pausing there, does anyone have any questions or comments for David at the moment? And if so, follow Peter's example, raise your virtual hand or pop something in the chat, or when no one else is talking, just unmute and talk. But Peter, do you want to come in?
This might be a question. First of all, thank you very much for coming, David. It's really interesting to hear about this. The thing about DOQ, I said it in the chat, but I would love to see that as a case study on its own as to the choice of DOQ. I mean, your explanation was great, but having something to refer to other people, to would be really interesting, I think. This might be a question for later on, but I'm curious about the differences between what you're describing and Microsoft's ZTDNS that we heard about recently from Tommy Jensen.
Right. Thank you, Kurt, and sorry, Peter. I will definitely let you know that the intent is that when we make a publicly available announcement for our Atom OS and service, then the choice of DOQ is something that I felt we needed to articulate because it would get some appreciation as well. But as for the differences between Microsoft ZTDNS and Atom One and our Don't Talk to Strangers solution is, broadly speaking, Microsoft ZTDNS is at the endpoint, and Atom One is at the gateway, if you just look at those two together.
Okay.
But Atom OSN and Microsoft ZTDNS will basically be operating both at the endpoint. And our approach to doing OSN on Windows predates when we found out about ZTDNS, but it's a different approach. And that different approach was so that things like captive portal issues could be resolved. Anyway, so more on that information is coming later, because there are some difficult problems that we needed to get to the point where it's usable enough. And we are at that point now where I wouldn't try to sell security to anybody that isn't already convinced they need it, because inevitably your security and convenience, or security and productivity, say, is like a teeter-totter. And so if you dial up the security, you're going to lower your convenience or productivity. And what we felt like we needed to do is kind of bend that teeter-totter a little bit, like high level of security, but always increase on the productivity side. And that's why we worked hard on what we call the enabler side. Our enabler system is basically a protocol that allows you to specify by FQDN or by IP ranges and TCP, UDP, ICMP on what destinations you want always allowed. And you have a simple button there on the dashboard to say, allow Zoom to work all the time on all of these policies, and it's done. Now, the IP discovery is okay. What we don't yet have is a global system that allows an application developer to specify, to say, I'm the Zoom author, and within Zoom, these are the IP ranges and ports and protocols that we use that are using IP addresses not within DNS. And I'm hoping that we can get together and collaborate on that. This was suggested by John at Quad 9, that people like Tommy, his team, and our team, and anyone else that is in this space now about treating unknown IP addresses as strangers, to come up with a standard for that kind of discovery. And so we've done some legwork on that already. We have things that we think would work. It could be done via standard SVCB records, for example. And then because SVCB is already something that is being used for doing designated resolver discovery. If any of you are interested in looking at RFC 9462, it's already on a final track. And with RFC 9462, the endpoint that is able to use DOT, DOH, DOQ, the idea is that you want to give it a way to increase its security posture at the operating system level and not rely on browsers to do it for you, right? You have a lot of endpoints today, endpoint security software, that also would like it to be within the operating system rather than the browser bypassing DNS discovery through the OS layer. And so we have that already. And what we want to do is get that adopted more broadly. In my observation, iOS 18 supports 9462. So the very first thing that does when it joins a Wi-Fi network from an iPhone, iPad, it says, hey, here's an SVCB query, and asks for _DNS.resolver.arpa. And then our product today already gives it the DOH DOQ name and path so that iOS then instantly upgrades itself. So now it's done only 2 queries over legacy DNS. It did captive.apple.com in order to determine if it was on a captive portal. It did that over legacy. And secondly, it did a SVCB query, and then after that, all queries are done over DOH, DOQ. On a local area network, DOH is fine, right? Because in order to do security properly, you really want all your endpoints talking to the gateway for DNS in order for this whole process to work. And so there, DOH over DOQ, there's going to be no advantage, since you're probably going to follow that up, Peter, with that question. It's when you're on the internet elsewhere, when you're at home, when you're overseas, and then you want to do a query back to your protective resolver that's in your own enterprise, that's when you really are going to have the advantage of using DOQ. So our RFC 9462 answer will be DOH and DOT, because there's a lot of devices that actually, especially in the IoT world, stuff that is like in the home assistant kind of product range, those endpoints end up using DOT if offered over DOH. And there's no resource advantage of one over the other in the case of inside the perimeter. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. So fundamentally, there's not really much difference between this solution and Microsoft's ZTDNS that Tommy. Okay, all right, cool, interesting. Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah, except you know, I have no bone to pick with Microsoft, except that we like to protect all our IoT devices, not just Windows, right?
Sure. Yeah. Although I think you guys should work together on the service discovery thing with the IP discovery, and I think service binding sounds like a good way to go.
I see that Tommy responded. That's what he was waiting to hear. So that's fantastic. It sounds like it's a good base for us to start from. I think that'll work quite well. We didn't want to do anything net new. We didn't want to do DNS TXT. We did not want to do the PTR thing. So this, I think, will probably be as good as it gets. And I still think that there's going to be issues like that we're going to have to work through, such as what if a third party? What if Zoom never plays along? What if they're just like, we don't care? We would still like that to work through some other means. And so we have some ideas on how to allow an enterprise their own to say, well, these are the apps we use, so we're just going to publish their records for them. One of the there's a number of ways that we can explore that possibility, but yeah, I think we'll have a solution in the coming while.
Yeah, it could be an interesting use case to put forward for a solution, maybe one of the forthcoming IETF meetings. Not sure where it might fit in terms of working groups, but yeah, certainly solving a real world problem.
Yeah,
it's also interesting that you picked DOQ, because I was just sort of thinking, we sort of picked up in the chat, that other than AdGuard, I'm not aware of anyone else at the moment that's actively using DOQ. Which isn't to say that there shouldn't be, but it's good. I'm sure the authors of the standard will be pleased that there's some additional take up.
Yeah. So the question from Eric is, if don't talk to strangers automatically blocks connections without DNS lookups, is there a way for a client to signal? Yeah. So what we call that today is we call them enablers. And an enabler is basically a definition of a CIDR block, or I should say a network of any size, and then the protocol and the port range, right? And then you create a bunch of them, and that's how you create groups that are then say, okay, this represents Zoom. And therefore now Zoom can do its thing. And by the way, hats off to Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams does not need an enabler. It's the only one of the I should say Zoom doesn't need it either, but Zoom operates better. As you can imagine, if my video to you guys back and forth and everyone else's was relayed over TCP, that's a lot more overhead and a lot more latency than if it was over UDP. So Zoom and Teams will actually operate without an enabler, but if there is an enabler specifying the UDP ports and IP ranges that Zoom uses for that, then it optimizes the Zoom experience. So that's one thing that we're seeing with applications that are, and by the way, I have over the past 6 years been in touch with many vendors, including LinkedIn Video. When they bought Lynda, they actually listened to me, and they had the new one not do IP discovery through its previous methods. But there are tools that are at my frustration level not yet quite there. So for example, Signal. Signal is my favorite messaging app. it does not require an enabler at all until you start doing group calls. And if you do a group call, then it actually does end up using a service from AWS, but you'll never know which IP addresses are going to be used. And it uses port 10,000 by default. And so now, in order to make Signal work, we're basically saying, hey, let's allow all of AWS UDP port, 10,000. Well, that to me is a problem. I will not enable that. And the reason is at the moment, there's an attacker, and I'm a target, that knows that I have anything on Amazon reachable by UDP port 10,000, then it's simple enough for them to stand up a C2 channel at any one Amazon AWS. And because it's a non-standard port, likely even Amazon protective services will never even discover it, right? And then we have this other pattern that we're observing, where malware nowadays will be targeting iOS and Android, but in a very creative, non-discoverable way. And here's what I found out. I would get links and I would put them into VirusTotal. I checked various threat intelligence sources. No one's got it marked as bad. And if I use our sandbox environment from a business IPv4 network, it would just show me a 404. There's no content here. If I did it from a Google Cloud instance or AWS Cloud instance, it showed me nothing there. If I did it from DigitalOcean, it showed me there's nothing there. It wasn't until I used a device that has no protection on it, that's on an IPv6 network, that ended up surfacing the malware. So if you're now on a blue team, you need to be aware that red teamers are going to start hosting their malware on sites that will not be discoverable by any of the threat intel sources ever. And if we take a look at the problem we have, the computer science problem that we actually have before us is this. Depending on how you count, there's around 1 billion domain names registered. And at any point in time, we are looking for all of the bad in the billion. And the computer science problem is that the billion doesn't change that much, but where the bad is constantly being scattered in new places. And so, of course, we now have multi-billion-dollar industries around threat intelligence discovery. And you have entire cybersecurity companies where half their marketing budget is with researchers, because it turns out publishing research of how this malware works is a fantastic form of marketing, right? And so we've not done anything to actually get ahead of the problem. So this whack-a-mole game just continues. Now, if you take this approach instead that we just described with zero trust DNS, don't talk to strangers, protective DNS resolvers, you're literally flipping it on its head. Now you're saying, I'm only going to go to domains that are known, right? So this is now talking about the protective DNS resolver part, assuming you've done that right, and IP addresses discovered through permitted DNS queries. You're now flipping that computer science problem on its head. And you're now saying, I'm interested in discovering the good and needed. And you guys might be interested in this simple statistics that we found. We are trustees of of a Fortune 50 whitelist in Canada. And the domain list of what they need to access in a company of more than 50,000 employees is less than 15,000 domains that get visited more than once per month. 15,000. So you're talking about 1 billion versus 15,000. So the discovery of the 15,000 turns out to be the key, because now you can basically say, let's go to allow listing mode, and then only invoke a human or an AI approach when a new domain is discovered, and do that super fast so that you remove the friction. If we do this collectively, my expectation is that for many cases, the red teamers will just throw up their hands. In many cases, the actual adversaries will say, it's gotten too expensive to do crime. In the end, in a law-abiding, when crime no longer pays, or it's too expensive, or it's better to just go legit, that's what we do as a society. Looking at this completely outside of a moral compass, strictly looking at it from a risk-reward perspective, that is what we need to do to make sure that we end up exhausting the attacker's resources as often in as many places as possible, where just applying their craft to protective services was what they do instead. Yeah.
I think we could all applaud that were it to happen, although I remain skeptical that they'll just give up and go away at that point. But they're very creative people, but it would be a good thing nevertheless to inject more friction into the ecosystem, David. Right, let me just sort of prompt, anyone got any final comments or questions for David? I think on that last stat, I vaguely remember, Tommy, I think you suggested 100 to 150 addresses was a pretty good starting point for the allow list. I may be misremembering that slightly, but it was a surprisingly small number that was a credible start point.
Right.
Yeah, I think,
so
sorry, go Tommy.
no, so I didn't mean to. I found we ended up with 50 to 100 CIDRs that needed to be allowed, your enablers. And then after that, everything can be handled in the DNS. Counts of domain names slightly different, but I will note we weren't using Zoom as approved software, which would have doubled that list easily when I'm looking at their documentation. But
Yeah.
people were definitely frightened of that. Like, I don't know about you when you started your product offering, but that was definitely a huge point of fear. This is going to be completely unmanageable. In practice, people's uses aren't as diverse as they think they are.
That's right. Yeah, spot on. That's a really good summary. Thank you, Tommy. And your point about Zoom needing a lot more blocks than you would feel comfortable with, I completely agree. There's one space here that I'll add, and that is that entertainment and video games are not a fit for this. I am glad to tell you that in my house, in my home, with teenage boys, we do put them behind protective policies even while they are gaming. But the discovery process for something like Fortnite is an absolute nightmare. I'm at the point where my small little Atom-based LANer box that's running BIOS or pfSense at home, it takes longer to start up than some of our enterprise networks because it has to create those tables on startup. Because I have somewhere around 100,000 plus entries in terms of table entries that get made. So now the games all work, but that's not for the faint of heart. So I would just add that in a business case, I'm completely in agreement with Tommy that the needs are not as diverse as people would think. We have extremely large networks globally with tens of thousands of devices, 100% of them running in this zero trust mode, and for 3 years running. And so it's not like it's brand new. This has been running for a while, and there is a smart rollout that is really important to apply. And we do that. That smart rollout takes place in micro steps so that you're not killing the heart patient while you're doing a heart surgery. And that works actually, and it's been proven over and over. We're letting up another large network tonight after business closing, and then watching it very closely over the SIM. And by the way, if you do use any of you are SIM analysts, what you'll get to is all of the violations that happen. If you do all of the enablers properly, then the IP address connections that are attempted is actually very useful signal. You're not getting massive amounts of noise that you then have to get the signal out of. It's actually really easy to get a proper signal out of that. So we're super stoked about where this is all going.
Fantastic. Right, well, let's draw in there then. So David, thank you for that. That's really useful. I hope that will trigger some sort of continuing discussions offline from this call. I'll post a link to your site and to a recording of your sort of presentation, Don't Talk to Strangers, as well. Should anyone have any sort of, further interest, that'd be a good resource, as well as speaking directly to David. So we appreciate your time, David, and I hope that was as interesting to everybody else as it was for me. I think two things are coming out of that immediately spring to mind. One is possibly at the next hackathon for the ITF meeting in Dublin. Maybe there's something there about that sort of discovery, that information sharing from applications could be quite useful. And then maybe separately, there's a discussion with LinkedIn about streamlining how they do stuff to make that rather more manageable, bring more in line with some of the other apps in this space. But anyway, thank you, David, and you're welcome to stay on. I'm just going to run through some other stuff, but if you've got other stuff to do, fantastic, do that. Otherwise, please stay on. You're most welcome to do so.
I'm happy to stay on because there are more questions, but I'll look for you if you want me to respond to them.
Surely. Okay. Well, yeah. Any follow-up questions? Pop something in the chat whilst we continue the call. Right. Okay. So let me just go back to my slides. I'll do this quite briefly just to respect everybody's time. Okay, so showing my slides just from the news headlines this week, which you will have seen in your inbox if you get the weekly headlines. If you don't and want them, just ping me an email and I'll send it to you. But some things that caught my eye, sort of DNS related first. Interesting story in Malaysia. A couple of Malaysian ISPs are reportedly using transparent DNS proxies to redirect queries from Google and Cloudflare, so Quad 8, Quad 1 to their own servers. And there's some additional information, including a response from the Malaysian regulator. You'll see on the link. I'll share these slides afterwards in case you don't get the weekly email. So that was interesting to see. I've not come across that previously. So yeah, an interesting story. Also, and I may have mentioned this a week or so ago, but if not, ICANN have formally reserved .internal for private use, so that won't be allocated as a TLD for commercial use. So that's good to see that confirmed. There was allegations of a breach of an ISP so that its users were getting malware rather than software updates. Although the details thus far seem quite thin. So suggestions that I think it's a Chinese ISP, but it looks like there's still more to be confirmed there. And also bottom of that screen, ZTDNS Labs, the story, this is on the APNIC podcast, about their post-quantum DNSSEC testbed, which looks like a good thing. So a bit more detail about that from a couple of the team there. A couple more I just signpost and then move on. Second one on the list, a discussion, a really interesting paper about trust and safety in domain name governments. So specifically for registries and registrars, a paper that's been put together from a couple of people well known in the policy space. So those of you with more of interest on the policy side, that's definitely worth your while reading. And in the same vein, on Thursday, the UN published its first draft treaty targeting cybercrime. I think the text has been agreed, but I think if I understand the UN processes, it now needs to be sort of formally put through for adoption, but that might be slightly wrong. But anyway, sort of at least a draft on cybercrime. Anyone that's closer to the UN processes than me, which is probably most people, put something in the chat if you're able to clarify that. But there's other stuff there which we don't have time for, so I'll skip over. A few partnership announcements which came out this week, so I included those on the list. Again, I won't read those. And then a whole bunch of other interesting stuff, most of which I'll skip over, so you can catch up with that at your own time. Less directly DNS relevant, but I thought it was interesting from the news this week. In terms of impending deadlines, there's calls to presentations for RIPE 89, which concludes in just less than a couple of weeks' time, and similarly for the ICANN DNS symposium, again that's a couple of weeks. Should you be planning to put forward any presentations for that? And then there's other stuff, but with more time to go. In terms of forthcoming events, only 2 events this month. That's the Domain Name Summit in London, which Nigel helpfully mentioned on the call last week and thoughtfully sent me the link for afterwards. So if you want to attend that, that's 19th to 21st August in London. And then at the back end of August, the start of the APNIC meeting in Wellington. And then, as I mentioned, be a few more weeks before we get to the ICANN DNS Symposium week in Colombia. And then finally, from me, next week we go to about DNS abuse. Peter is going to take us through some thoughts on DNS abuse, mainly linked to work of the first SIG, but as a teaser, it probably have to now, Peter, so apologies, may briefly touch on abuse within blockchain-based naming systems as well, just at the back end of that discussion. So,
but not as part of the first thing. Just to be clear, but we'll
just as a teaser at the end, just to say we cover the shiny new stuff as well. And then various other things which we can sort of cover nearer to the time, but I just wanted to also highlight we won't do calls on the 23rd of September and 4th of November because of clashes with other meetings. But if on the 23rd of September you happen to be in Santa Marta for the ICANN DNS Week Symposium and other things, then let's do something in person, maybe over drinks instead. And similarly on 4th of November, if you're in Dublin for the ITF meeting, again, as we did it in Vancouver a few weeks back, so we do the same thing there. So anyone that's there in person, we can do something face-to-face in the evening during that meeting. So for either Santa Marta or Dublin, if you're there, let me know and we'll figure out a time to meet up and do something face-to-face for a change. Okay, that's everything from me. So let me stop sharing and just see well, any other business. So let's see if anyone's got anything else you want to bring in. And I can see Nigel. Yeah, thank you. Clarified. I thought I was grappling towards what I thought was the case. So the UN Cybercrime Treaty has been agreed, but now needs to be ratified by the wider United Nations body. So I presume that's just a vote or some other formal process for that. So definitely worth looking at as you have interest on the policy side, along with that piece on trust and safety for registrars and registrars. David, did you want to come back in on Dan's comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So Dan's comment is about how this creates some issues when you have a device going from one network and with maybe a browser application open and going to another one. And this was more of an issue years ago than it is today, because we did this before browsers had matured to where they are today. So I would put forth that there's 3 dynamics that play to that no longer being an issue anywhere that I know of. Okay, so maybe there would be applications that are maybe not browser-based that cache their DNS, but browsers or our default on any DNS queries is to offer a time to live of 60 seconds, number one. And the only reason we didn't make it less than 60 seconds is because Chrome and Chromium insists that any query will not be requeried within 60 seconds. So we had to make sure that the answer we gave was actually matching Chrome's minimum. And so that's where that came from. Otherwise, we would have made it even shorter. So that's the short TTL is 60 seconds on any query. Even if the public authoritative record gives a longer record, we say, no, it's 60 seconds, because we want the endpoint to ask the gateway again if it still needs the hole open, right? Secondly, network stacks tend to expire their own DNS cache as soon as there's a connectivity change. So if you're switching Wi-Fi, a modern Mac OS, iOS, Android, Windows will expunge its local cache. And so that ends up being less of an issue. What that means is that when the cache is expired and it changes networks, it's now going to ask for that resource again by DNS. And because it gets the answer, it's automatically getting opened again. And so therefore that issue is gone. And finally, one of the things I didn't get a chance to show, and I can show you real quick now, if you don't mind, I'll show you a quick test here. If I do a search for Flurry, right? So my protective DNS resolver is going to block this HTTPS destination here of flurry.com. So if I click on it, in most traditional services, there would have to be a certificate minted in order for it to present to me a block page. But when I do it with our solution, notice that it ends up taking me to a block page, but the URL is not Flurry. The URL is my DOH server on my local network, but it got redirected with a user-friendly block page, but it was instant. And the way this works, and the reason this works and why I bring up our browser extension, is that with this browser extension in place, it basically looks for a destination, like in my case, flurry.com was blocked. So it offered the block page of the gateway, which says that doesn't match where you're at. So it sends an instant reset, and that's what allows this whole process to work. So and our extension is available on multiple platforms. So adamnet.io/extension actually ends up getting into a landing page of the various Chrome, Mac OS, iOS store, as well as Firefox. So maybe that answers your question, Dan, that I don't think that issue is there any longer that you used to have, but there may be others that we're not aware of. But we do have many thousands of endpoints that have been on this a while. So I think by now we have a reasonable representation of what scenarios we might run across.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Okay, well, on that illuminating note, thanks again, David. Appreciate you taking the time to take us through that. It's interesting to see two different architectural approaches, but the same conceptual intent, if you will, but very different approaches to achieve it, but some commonality on what looks like the right answer. So if that leads to some joint progress on that discovery piece, I think that will be most welcome to make this a more streamlined process. Okay, well, thanks everyone for your time. As always, I'll with a link to the recording post call. Hope that was useful, and have a great week, and look forward to catching up same time next week. So see you all there. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye-bye.